Hello there, and welcome back to my painting channel. And today I am painting a Blood Bowl gutter runner from the Underworld Denizens box. And here he is, all primed up and ready to go. This is our filthy rat in a really nice fast running pose. And as always, I'm going to start with my skin tone. I'm going to use Kislev Flesh as a base so that we can have some nice bright toned up skin tones rather than letting it darken down too much. For this you just want to make sure that we are covering all of the skin areas, so all of the legs, the feet, the arms, hands, and across and around the face and mouth here as well. These characters are wearing a little bit of a hood and things like that, so they do cover quite a lot of their skin, but there are some patches that do stick out. Don't worry too much if you paint a little bit over where the fur is, because we're going to go back and we're going to paint that a little bit later anyway. I think painting the fur is one of the last stages on this miniature, just so that we know that once we get to painting all of the furry parts in, we kind of know that we're pretty much towards the end there. So once your Kislev Flesh has dried, if you just want to go across and give a nice even coat of Citadel Reikland Flesh Shade. Reikland Flesh Shade's a very good shade for doing skin tones, because it does have a sort of little warmth to it and a warmth to the sort of colour and texture to it. I prefer using this to quite a lot of other shades for flesh tones. I tend to find that this doesn't darken your skin down too much, and it allows you to build the layers up on top quite nicely and quite smoothly. So once your Reikland Flesh Shade has dried, what you want to do is just go back to your Kislev Flesh and just hit the raised areas. So we're just going to paint up the I'm just going to paint the skin back essentially, but what we're going to do is we're just going to miss the recess parts, so the bits where the shade has settled into the gaps. So just along the leg here, we're going to hit the calf muscles, down and across the ankle line, and the heels and things like that. But we're just generally going to leave where the shade has settled, so we get this tone between a sort of light and dark as well. As you can see, I thin my paints down quite nicely so that it runs smoothly onto the model as well. That way, when it dries, you get a nice even tone to the colour. So instead of having a big splodge of really thick paint in one area and then not enough in another, by doing it this way, it takes a couple of coats or a couple of layers to get to the overall colour and the overall texture that you'd like. But it's worth it in the end because the overall tone is quite nice. Just take your time and be quite careful around the mouth area here. Try to use the tip of your brush because there are a few little indentations and things that you're going to want to try to pick up on. So once we've done the Kislev Flesh, we're just going to go across and use the next highlighted point. And the next area for this is a Flayed One Flesh from Citadel also. And for this we're going to, again, just hit the most raised areas and the most raised points. And this one is also quite a thin layer that I'm doing. So again, this is going to dry and tone very, very nicely into just the upper raised areas. As you see there, I'm just picking out on some of the points that are sticking out the most, just trying to run across like the kneecaps, the muscle points, the joints and things like that. I'm trying to keep a nice uniform, structured angle to the brush so that all of the brush strokes tend to be the same as well. It gives a nice smoother finish then when the miniature is dried and it kind of looks all uniformed. It has a really nice tone to it. But as you see, I'm just taking my time, just building the layers up. Again, it'll take more than one layer to get to the sort of colour that you'd like it to be. So there's no rush in trying to get this done in one layer or one sitting. Once your skin is done, I'm going to move on to the cloak and the clothing. For this, I'm using a German grey from Vallejo, purely because when I tend to paint dark models and dark clothing and dark armour and things like that, I like the armour to be very, very dark down, but I don't like to paint in black too often, because black is too much of an extreme. So once you paint in black, you kind of lose a lot of your detail. So instead of painting in black, I'd rather paint a very, very dark grey and then build a few shades up from there. So we build in a few more sort of tones and highlights, rather than paint in black and then trying to find a way of getting the textures and the details back. So as you can see, I'm just covering the cloak here at the moment, just making sure that I got a nice even tone across the whole cloak. And like I said, I'm going to do the same on the hood and of course the clothing as well. What I'm going to do is just paint across the hood here, and going to try to avoid hitting his big rat-like ears, and I'm going to try to avoid hitting the fur that is sticking out on his shoulders as well. I have seen people that paint the fur in as ripped clothing, but personally I like to keep this as like a fur, so that it's the fur is sticking out of his clothing and creating a little bit more character and a bit more depth to the character as well. With this being such a dark colour as well, it's always good to take your time, because you don't want to get this colour onto your flesh tones that you've spent so long now building up. So just be very, very careful, and again, thin the paints nice so that they dry nice and smooth. The good thing with the German grey is it is quite a thick colour, so when you do thin it down, it doesn't need multiple layers. One layer should actually be quite enough. Probably the toughest part of this miniature is getting inside to paint all of its clothing in here. So for this, I would recommend you really just take your time. Try not to go too extreme, just little bits of paint on your brush at a time. Don't worry too much if you've got to go in and do multiple layers. That's absolutely fine, but just try to avoid getting that dark grey on the skin. So once we've done the outside layer, which is his clothing and his cloak, we're then going to do the inside layer, which for this I'm using a Vallejo red. You can use any red, a Mephiston red or anything like that. But with this one, I actually tone it up to a Mephiston red, which I'll show you as we progress through the layers. Because this one has a sort of, I don't know, it's quite a different sort of tone to a normal sort of mid-tone red. This one's got a little bit of darkness to it. It's a little bit of a different tone to the red. So by the time we darken it and then lighten it back up, it does have a really nice sort of middle contrast to it. And we'll see that as we go anyway. So from there, what you want to do is just hit all of the straps, so the leather strap in. Now normally, if you follow me, if you've watched a few of my videos, you would know that I normally use a Citadel Dryad bark, and you can carry on doing that, that's absolutely fine. However, I have been getting into a lot of Vallejo paints recently, so I wanted to try a different kind of paint to see if I had to see if this would do the same sort of thing, if it would give me the same kind of texture, and it does. So if you wanted to try a Vallejo alternative, you could use this. This is a Vallejo Panzer Aces version, and this one is dark rust, and this is just like a base colour, so this is the darker part to those leather straps, which we're going to lighten up a little bit later. Not only am I doing the leather straps, I'm also doing his leather glove as well, the same colour, so ties all of the colours in so that nothing looks a little bit too out of place. I mean, if you've got a glove that's a different colour brown to the straps, it gets a little bit much for your eyes, so you kind of want to keep a little bit of uniform in there as well to make it nice and easy on the eye and nice and appealing. Again, with the inside of the glove, just take your time, because with the pose that the character is in, it can be a little difficult to get onto the inside. So just take your time and try to do it in small stages. From there, the face mask, the dagger, and the ninja stars that we have hanging off the side, including with his little knuckle duster, his little hand weapons. I'm going to paint these in a silver. I'm using an army painter, which is a plate mail metal, But if you're sticking with your Citadel, you could use a lead belcher, which is a fantastic base colour silver. Darkens down nicely and then is easy to brighten back up as well. So for me, I'm using the army painter, but you could equally just as easily use lead belcher for this sort of project and this job as well. So like I say, don't forget the face mask, the dagger, and all of the ninja stars and shurikens and things that he has hanging off him. And this is just the raised area around the face. So once we've got to that stage, what we're going to do then is we're just going to place a null Nile, which is a very dark wash. This one is a black wash, and this is just to tie those colours in. So you want to cover all of what we've just painted apart from the skin. So we're doing the face mask, the dagger, we're doing the clothing, including the cloak on both sides, the red and the black. Red is quite an interesting colour to use shade on because you can use multiple colours of shade and it does shade down quite nicely. But for this we're using the null Nile on both, so that again it ties that into the darkness of the back of the cloak as well. So just give this a nice even layer. No need to go too extreme. Don't let the null Nile pool too much in certain areas, because you don't want certain parts to get covered in extreme black sort of shading. And also be very careful again of the skin tones. You spent all that time getting the skin tones to look lovely, you want to kind of be careful with those. So once your shade has dried, we're going to go back and we are just going to pick up the colours again. So I'm just going to highlight across what we've got here. For this next layer of highlighting, what we're actually going to do is we're going to move into doing a Citadel Eshin Grey, and the Eshin Grey sits on top of the German Grey very, very nicely. When you paint this, it looks quite light, but it does actually dry quite dark. Pretty much what we're going to do is we're just going to go back across the cloak, and we're going to hit all of the raised bits with this Eshin Grey, but we're just going to leave the black into the very, very darkest points. And we're going to do that across the cloak, the hood, and the clothing on the inside as well. And this Eshin Grey then will make the grey tone that we've got, this very, very dark tone, into a little bit more of an earthy mid-tone. So a really nice grey tone here. And so there we go, just continuing on with the Eshin Grey. This bit is now just going across the cloak. And this bit is just going across the cloak. I kind of made a mistake there and failed to put a little bit of paint on my brush. And pretty much we're just going to go across the cloak, and we're going to try to avoid any of those recessed points. So again, all these little chips and nicks in the cloak. And of course the area just across where the cloak is flowing, we're going to try to avoid that so that we can leave the black and the null Nile where it's sitting down in the cloak itself, just to kind of give it a little bit of a flow. So you're painting you're almost painting the motion into the miniature, because the miniature is quite dynamic anyway, so you're just following that line and following that pattern across, and it'll give the paint job a little bit more dynamism as well, so you're not just looking at a flat colour and a flat tone. And what you can do with this Eshin Grey, as you see here, you can, as you're painting, just leave a small line here like this, and as you do these things, a little bit of creative licensing and things like that, as you leave these little gaps, what you end up with is really nice little sort of creases that you're creating, so you can create a little bit of depth and a little bit of darkness and a little bit of character onto the cloaks. Just like so. And again, with a nice thin tone, this will sit lovely across the straight across the cloak. Now, once we've done the mid-tone with the Eshin Grey, we're going to continue using a Citadel. we're just going to run across with a Dawnstone. And with the Dawnstone, you just want to catch the raised edges as much as possible. So we don't want to go too extreme. And I made a little mistake just across the top by adding a little bit too much. But that's easily repaired by just going back with the Eshin Grey and filling those bits back in. But pretty much the Dawnstone is your highlight point here. Normally Dawnstone is quite a middle tone grey. However, because we've used a German Grey and an Eshin Grey, some really, really dark greys, what we get out of the Dawnstone then is a highlight instead. What you just want to do is run the edge of your brush just across the cloak, just like so. And again, it looks lighter than it actually is. So as you paint it, it looks quite bright. But if you give it just a little bit of time, you'll find once it dries down into a little bit of a darker point. Now, the most difficult part on this is trying to hit those highlighted raised areas just across the cloak around the head. You can see how fiddly this is by the fact that I'm struggling to find a way of getting my camera to focus as well, because it's such a small and difficult job. But you just want to try like this, trial and error, just want to try and catch the very, very tips of those raised edges so that it gives an idea that the light is just shining off the very tip of the creases and the folds. And that's going to give and build that depth between that German Grey, the Eshin Grey and the Dawnstone on your miniature. It's just going to build that layer, that texture, that highlight to the point where when you see your miniature on the tabletop, it is going to look like you've spent a lot of time catching into these edges. Like I say, any mistakes or anything like that, you can always tidy back up. Go back to your Eshin Grey, go back and tidy these bits up, go back and paint back into the recesses, and try to make those highlighted layers just a little bit thinner if you need to. Now, with the cloak pretty much done, on the darker side, we move back onto the red, and we're just going to use a Vallejo red here. Again, just thinning this down, so you should get a little bit of the tone coming back through from the black that we've added from the from the shade from the Null. Don't worry too much if you make mistakes. I make mistakes all of the time. And part of the painting, part of the fun of painting is correcting your mistakes as well. So don't worry too much. It's not the end of the world if you clip something and you have to go back and redo it. It's fine. It's all part of learning. It's all part of painting. It's all part of the fun side of the hobby. Well, what we should do is just get a nice even tone out of the red. But again, like I say, some of that darkness should show through underneath as well. It might take multiple layers to get to the stage that you want and the colour and the tone that you want, and that's fine as well. You know, if it takes 2 or 3 layers, that's fine. I'd rather take 2 or 3 layers of nice thin coats and get it nice and toned than go a bit too extreme and then have to try to fix it later. So once the red is done, you're going to move on to a Citadel Mephiston red. This is a really nice red. It has a really nice bright glow to it. And with this one, I'm painting across the cloak, so I'm trying to keep all of my lines nice and uniform going across the cloak. And with this, using a similar sort of effect as what I used on the back of the cloak with the grey. If you leave sort of very, very, very small gaps between your brush strokes, it almost adds to that creasing, and it almost adds to the dynamic way in which the cloak itself is flowing. And as you can see, I've hit a little bit of red again just up on the tip here, but I'll fix that a little later, so I'm not too worried. There we go, take it a little bit off, but it'll still need another little bit of paint to fix that. But yeah, as you see, we just using the same sort of direction, the same sort of brush flow, the same strokes, just to get that even flow across, because his cape is sort of flapping in the wind as he's running. We kind of want to get that even flow straight across. We don't want it to be too static, and we don't want the brush strokes to be looking or facing sort of the wrong way. I'm just going to do the same on the inside of his tabard here. As I said, we were going to go back to doing the leather. So the leather straps, we're using a darker point just as a a base tone then, so that we could highlight then and go back from the base part. And so with that, we're going to go on to a Vallejo flat brown. And with this is quite a warm brown. This has quite a nice warm sort of tone to it. There you go. And because this is thin as well, again, some of that underneath colour is going to show through. So when this dries, it's not going to be too extreme. It's not just going to be one thick layer of brown on top of another. It should give you a little bit of texture between. And don't forget to hit all of the little straps as well, going around holding on to all of his little weapons and gadgets, and the belt that he's got going around the back of his tabard as well, holding his clothing together. So from there we're going to move on and just use a pink horror for the tail. Now for the pink horror, this is a good base tone because we're going to highlight this really, really bright, so we're going to make some of the pink points really, really stand out, and that's going to be great against the darker tone that we've got with the clothing and the cloak. But with the pink horror, we're not just using it for the tail, we're going to use it also on the nose and on the ears as well. And again, because we've got a darker area in terms of the hood, that pink is really, really going to stand out. Pink and black are colours that tend to go together really, really nicely. You have a really extreme contrast between light and dark there. And so once the pink is dry, I'm going to shade this across with a Citadel Caribou Crimson. The Caribou Crimson is just a red shade. It darkens down in between the recessed points here. And it does dry to give a really nice sort of mixed tone between sort of the lighter raised points and the darker shaded areas. Don't forget also to do the ears and the nose as well. You don't need to put too much in. You see I just put a little bit too much inside the ear. You don't need to put as much as that in, just a little bit here and there would be great. There we go, that's a little bit better, a little bit of nice control across the front of the nose and things. So we're going to go back now to the army painter and just lighten up those battered silvers that we've got. And with this I'm using a shining silver. You can again also use a Citadel instead. That's absolutely fine. I find with metallics it's all about personal choice, and for me I like using the army painted metallics. I find they are very, very, very good. They have good coverage, but they also have very, very good brightness and contrasts. Like this one, Shining Silver, is very, very light to go on top of the one that we used previous. So yeah, this is my personal combination. So there we go. We're kind of getting towards the sort of the end here. So what we want to be looking at now is just using whatever colour you choose for your fur. So for this guy, I want him to have white fur, or rather like a creamy sort of milky colour fur. So just going to paint all the furry bits in with a Vallejo bone white. This bone white is a great colour for a base colour. So I use bone white for a lot of things like skeletons and fur if I'm doing sort of grey hair and things like that. This is great for those sorts of things. Don't forget to do the teeth and his claws as well, the fingernails and the nails across his feet and things like that. He does have quite a few little like points of fur that are quite complicated and difficult to get to, which are just a few little spikes and things that are sticking up from just behind and just above his tail. So take your time to make sure to get into all of those as well. Once your bone white is dried, you're going to move on and use your army painter soft tone. You can use a Citadel Agrax Earthshade, but Agrax Earthshade I find is a very dark shade. It's a very dark tone then. So with soft tone, this one is not so aggressive. It's quite light. It's quite nice. It's brown, but it doesn't darken everything down. And this one actually ties quite nicely into the skin tone that we've just used. So the fur and the skin will have a kind of even blend. So you don't need to do too much to blend the tones together, because the shades are going to do that for you. It's going to kind of work in your favour. If you do want it to be a little bit darker, you can add multiple layers of the same shade. So if you find that you've put your soft tone on and it's brown but it's not dark enough, then just add another layer. You know, it's all personal choice when you're painting your miniatures. This is more like just rough references to the colour scheme that I've used for this particular gutter runner. That doesn't mean that I'm right and it's the best possible paint scheme. It's just all about personal choice. They're your miniatures, it's your team, you paint them however you like. Can't forget the claw on his little pinky there. So, once that is dry, you're going to go back to the bone white now. And you're going to want to be very, very careful, because for this, you're just going to pick out the very, very tips and the very raised areas of the hair. Like so. So just take your time and just try to hit those points like so. So we're not doing like a dry brush or anything like that. I mean, you can dry brush, but personally for this type of thing, I think it's nicer to have a little bit of a personal input in terms of manually brushing the lines in, because you can see the amount of effort that you've put in as well, and you've got a little bit more control. Again, that doesn't mean that it's right, it's just what's right for me, and if you find it similar, then you can let me know. There you go, just trying to hit the very tips, like just trying to hit the very raised points, so that's where the lightness is, that's where the highlighting goes. And you want to do that across all of the fur. So whereas that's just one part on his leg, I'm going to try to make sure that we do that across the fur on all parts. Do the same thing as well with the, you want to do the same thing with the claws on his feet, and also the teeth with this colour, and go back to the bone white. With the teeth and claws, that's as far as you need to go. You don't necessarily need to add any more highlighting, because his teeth and claws and things, you kind of want to leave a little bit of dirt and things there anyway. And so you can see I'm just going across and picking up the very raised points, the very raised edges, just trying to paint up the fur to get a little bit of a little bit more depth to it. So we've got a little bit of brown behind, a little bit of light cream just coming up. There we go. So you're just hitting the very raised points. They're almost like spikes. He's furry, but they are very spiky bits of fur indeed. Just carrying on, we're just hitting the highlighted points, just trying to get that bone white in. So with the fur, we are going to highlight the fur once more, so we're going to hit a highlight edge with a Citadel Pallid Witch Flesh. So this sits very nicely on top of the bone white, and this makes it stand out very bright. This is where we're going to get the sort of very bright white fur that's going to stand out on the miniature. So whereas we had the bone white, sort of the cream was nice, but this now is going to just add that extra element of depth, just add that extra highlight as well. It's going to stand out lovely. This is going to be perfect, just what we want. And again, just taking our time, trying to get into a really, really close-centered sort of like position, so that you're keeping your hands steady. So I tend to lean my elbows and my forearms on the desk, and I think this is why sometimes I struggle a little bit with focus, because I tend to lean the model towards myself, because my eyes are pretty bad anyway. So you just want to kind of get yourself into a nice centered, strong position, so that as you just drag that brush closer to yourself, you've got a lot more control out of it. And as you see, we just hit in the very tips of the fur. It's almost a little bit like painting fire because of the way that the fur is moving and things like that. You just want to kind of hit the very tops so that you get the highlight in just the raised areas. So from there we're going to use a citadel moot green. Now moot green is very, very bright green indeed. I've watered this one down quite a lot, so this has become kind of like a glaze instead. And with moot green you just want to run this through the sort of scar that he's got on his hand here. And as you can see, it's very, very thin down paint, this. Very, very thin down paint. And that's good because this will just sit nicely in that scarred area. What I'm also going to do with the moot green, while we have the moot green, instead of just using it only on the hand, I'm going to give our little rat man some bright green eyes as well. So we're just going to be very, very, very careful to try to run this tiny little bit of moot green into the eye sockets on both sides. There we go. Now, this is probably the most complicated and difficult part of painting the entire model. So we're at the stage now where the miniature looks really good, and you can stop at this level of pink if you're happy with this level of pink. However, I do like getting the pink to really, really, really stand out. So for this, I'm going to a Vallejo squid pink. Now, squid pink is very, very bright, and this stands out a lot. This makes a real nice bright colour and bright tone to your miniature, rather than being so toned down and dull with the dark and the black area that we've got for the cloak. So with a very thin down, or rather with a thin down version of squid pink, what we're going to do is just pick out on those areas, the nose, the ears and the tail. The tail is the most difficult bit that I found to do consistently, but it is insanely rewarding to do also. And pretty much what I've done with the squid pink is I'm just trying to catch the raised points, and I'm just trying to bring that brush down so that I'm painting around the tail as I'm painting around the circular areas. So as you see, I'm just picking them out one at a time, and what I do is I'm doing them sort of one by one, just painting on the one side. Then I'll turn the miniature around and try to see where that paint has reached up to the top point, and try to match that paint going down on the other side. Like I said, this is very fiddly. This is something that you don't have to do. But for me personally, when painting Skaven and rats and things like that, when you have something like this in a group, so like your Blood Bowl team, if you've got 12 or 16 players that have got this sort of effect on the tails, as you can see, it grows and progresses. This is really, it's really exciting, and it's actually it's a real good sort of focal point when your miniatures are on the table, because people are going to look at that and see just the sheer amount of effort that you've put into painting each one. Like I say, you don't have to do it, it's all personal choice, but for me, I think this looks great because it really does show how much how much time you've spent painting the tail and the miniature, and spending time on this particular model. And it's not for everyone, you know, some people want a quick fix, just cover it in pink horror and then carry it crimson, and that's great. If you're happy with that and you want them just on the table, that's great. The cool thing with doing this effect though is you don't need it to be perfect, because nothing is perfect. So when you're combining the lines and you're getting the pink bits to sit next to each other, it doesn't matter if the lines are a little bit squiff and a little bit, you know, uneven, because nothing in life is nothing in life is exact, nothing is perfect, nothing is even. We're talking about a rat here, so we're talking about something that has had a tough life living in the sewers and things like that. It's not going to be perfect, so try to be as close as you can, but it doesn't matter if you can't get it exact. And with the beady eyes, I'm adding a little bit of shade from Games Workshop, I think the Bale Tang Green. And that's pretty much it. That's where I'm leaving it complete. And as you see, this looks great across a multiple group of miniatures for the Underworld team that I'm painting. It's a really great way of painting dark armour without painting black, but it's also a really nice way of making your pink stand out on that dark clothing as well. So as always, my friends, thank you very, very much for watching. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.